Well, we're halfway through the General Assembly here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it's what we call crossover. Bills are still moving, and laws are still looking to be made. We'll talk more about it with our guest, alum and good friend, Delegate Cliff Hayes. Let's stay the one. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back. It's Stay in the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We want to thank you again for joining us as you always do on this Sunday morning as we wake up early and do this phenomenal show to inform you and give you a voice about policy and laws affecting you. Again, as we do, we broadcast live from the campus of the Norfolk State University, the largest and best HBCU in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and also the best, a top HBCU in the country. And recently designated the number one band, HBCU band in the country. So that was fun. That is a phenomenal honor by the Marching Spartan Legion. Also, we broadcast again from WNSB, Hot 91, the soul of VA here in Hampton Roads, the station located on the campus of Norfolk State University. And we're here in studio with our producer that keeps us right and tight on the wheels of steel, Marvin Folks, also known as DJ Scandalous, who is the hardest working man in radio. You can hear him every day, Monday through Friday from 2 to 6 p.m. on Saturdays. And, of course, on Sundays, he's live in studio with me here. So I really appreciate the work that he does for this phenomenal show that we do have. With us, this is our annual legislative update series. So during the time of the General Assembly in January and February, I do a show every Sunday where we address a different issue, a different topic about the laws that are being made right as we speak. In Richmond, the capital of Virginia. And I'm fortunate to have with us our very good friend, alum of the Spartan Nation, and representative delegate of the 77 district here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, my good friend, Delegate Cliff Hayes Jr. Delegate Hayes, how you feel this morning?
Well, good morning there, Dr. Claville and DJ Scandalous, and to the entire Spartan Nation. It is indeed a pleasure to be able to be with you once again on the Hot 91.1 WNSB.
Absolutely. Well, look, you are no stranger to this program. You're no stranger to this campus. You're one of the biggest supporters of your alma mater, and one of the biggest supporters of this show. One of the biggest supporters of me, and a good friend as well. So, again, we're always thankful to have you on the show because you're in session right now, and there's a lot going on. You're back and forth to Richmond. Having meetings in committees and all that good stuff. Tell our audience a little bit about, kind of where you are now, your day-to-day while you're in Richmond.
Yeah, Dr. Claville, at this point, and as you all well know, we have a short session this year, being an odd year, 45-day session, and we have crossed over with the halfway mark, and in fact, just inside of about 13 days before the end of the session, being a part-time legislature, we have about 13 days left to pass legislation during our formal session that we have. So here we have taken a look at all of the legislation that's successfully passed the House. It has gone over to the Senate and vice versa. The legislation that was introduced in the Senate that made it out of the Senate, we have begun looking at that legislation as well. and anything that will make it to the governor's desk will do so by surviving both chambers. And then, of course, it will be up to the governor to sign and or veto said legislation. So we're looking at the final curve here as we wrap up the session here with just 2 weeks of, and I'm talking business days, 2 weeks left in the session. There's a lot that was introduced, but certainly because of the nature of the shared power that we have, much of the successes that we've seen in the Senate are not surviving in the House, and vice versa. Some of the extreme measures that have been introduced in the House may have squeaked by and gotten out of the House, but the Senate has been there to reject some of the notions that and ideas, the repealing, if you will, of so many advances that have been made in recent years. And we can't help but to focus on the one matter at heart, and that is voting, access to the voting booth. Many gains were made years ago in the Virginia General Assembly, and Virginia has become the model that many states wish they had such laws with some of the access to voting measures that we have. And we're not going to allow those measures to be rolled back. And so we just employ and encourage folks to stay closely attentive to what's going on, because there have been a number of attempts to change that ease and that access. For instance, we have 45 days early voting in Virginia, and there were some bills this time that literally were pushed to reduce the number of days of early voting in the Commonwealth. We thought that those days were long over, but believe me, these folks are still trying to keep and to suppress the vote in the Commonwealth. But we know whenever we work hard to hold the country and hold the Commonwealth to what's been placed on paper, it's going to benefit most people.
Right.
We're not interested in any type of dedicated effort towards a small group of folks. We want the masses of the people to enjoy the freedoms and continue to enjoy those freedoms that we have hung, bled, and died for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it always baffles me about the push to attack voting rights. Now, of course, you and I both know the reason why, but it seems like to me early voting actually helps both sides, right? I mean, we all have constituencies that are older, that are younger, that are professional, that are blue collar, that work different hours. You know, why, in your opinion, why this fight against early voting?
Well, again, these are just measures. One way, it's by 1,000 cuts. Folks want to see what they can do to roll us back to a painful time. Mm-hmm. And the early voting is one way to try to get at reducing opportunities for people to vote. And then right after that, it'll be something else, cut by cut. And that's where we found how we found ourselves in this place right now. It hasn't been by any one action over 50 years, 100 years. It's been the slow degradation of democracy here in this land. And so we got to do all we can. I know that when I was in the second grade, I learned the Pledge of Allegiance. And, of course, that last stanza, last phrase says liberty and justice for all, right? So we ought to be willing to make sure that we uphold that which we've learned, that which we pledged to, that there would be liberty and justice for all people. And so we want to make sure that we do that. And to those who don't think that voting matters, we can't fall prey to that posture, because if we think that voting doesn't matter and allow that message to prevail, then you're saying the lives of Fannie Lou Hamer, the lives of Malcolm X, the lives of Martin Luther King Jr., that none of those lives matter. And I dare to say that even Medgar Evers' life, registering folk to vote in his front yard, gunned down in front of his family, all of that matters. Those lives mattered. Those individuals sacrificed themselves for a reason. They saw the difference that voting makes. And yes, there have been some gains, and we have made advances because of access to the voting booth. So don't allow anybody to lead you to believe that voting does not matter.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, one of the things that happens every year during the session is that the governor puts out his agenda, right? And that's done before the session starts. And I talked about last show, I broke down the schedule and what usually happens during the legislative session. And we talked about crossover and where we are now. But one thing that points out that really looks me in the face when I look at the governor's agenda, and you and I have talked about this too, is right now the governor proposed $1 billion in tax cuts, but he proposed another $2 billion in additional spending. So, you know, the question that I've always had, and you and I, we talked about this, how do you cut $1 billion, but then you ask for another $2.6 billion in new spending? Where does that money come from?
Well, I just think it's a matter of philosophy, the differences in philosophy, and that's where voting matters. Some believe that in a process of tax cuts for the top 1% and for major companies and corporations, but studies have shown that what really matters for companies willing to come here to the Commonwealth, or will come to a locale or a state, but it's a comprehensive package. You can't cut taxes enough to be an incentive for someone to come here, because these are real people that work for these companies, these corporations. And so it's about quality of life issues for the personnel overall that will make a difference in a company making its decision where and when to locate to a particular state or locale. And so we should never forget that part to the equation. So those incentives, of course, cuts, and then turn around. Let me just say this. The pie is but so big. It's a finite pie. And that's what government is, right? It's a exercise of taking a list of unlimited demands and overlaying that with limited resources. And that exercise, through that exercise, you will determine what your priorities are, because you don't have enough money, enough resources for it all, right? So you do have to prioritize. And so when you put forth a budget, it's going to tell what seems to be most important to you. And thus we have the three budgets that we have in front of us: the governor's proposed amendments, the House proposed amendments, and the Senate proposed amendments to the budget. I remind folks that a conversation that I had with then Governor-elect L. Douglas Wilder, asking him the question what he thought was most important about his role. as the incoming governor. And having served as a senator prior and in the House of Delegates prior, I asked him what he thought, what was the most important as governor. He said, well, one of the things that we do and we push for is we push for a piece of the pie. Mm-hmm. He said, but it's nice now to be in a position to have your hand on the knife when the pie is being cut, when it's being cut and sliced. And so I never forgot that. And it's certainly a blessing to be serving on appropriations on the House side to see exactly what he meant. So it does matter when your hand is on the knife. I know by personal example, after serving as chair of capital outlay of appropriations, the things that we were able to get done.
Absolutely. A lot, especially a lot for Norfolk State. We appreciate that.
Coach Dick Price in his wisdom, God rest his soul, always would say, throw the rope back. And that's what we're doing. We're throwing the rope back for our land of Sparta.
Absolutely. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. You're listening to our annual legislative update with our good friend and NSU alum and great supporter of Norfolk State, Delegate Cliff Hayes, delegate of the 77th District here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Cliff, when we talk about, having your hand on the knife to be able to issue out the pieces of the pie, there's an election coming up. As soon as this session is over with in November of this year, every single seat in the House and also in the Senate will be up for re-election. Well, re-election and election. 140 seats. With that being the case, Dunn Scott, again, a good friend of yours and mine, and currently the leader of the Democratic caucus, stated that if the Democrats retake the House, he becomes the Speaker of the House. And it was the first time that an African-American male and African-American would become Speaker of the House of Delegates. Tell us about the power of having a member of your own, the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus, and as holding and being in the position of the Speaker of the House of Delegates.
Yeah, Dr. Claville, it's a tremendous, tremendous opportunity to know that we could potentially be on the cusp of having our first African-American Speaker of the House, who happens to be a member of the Divine Nine, who happens to be from Hampton Roads, who happens to have a story of redemption.
Absolutely.
And who happens to be an attorney, a defense attorney. That combination will certainly make tremendous difference here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That position as Speaker of the House, let me just say this. When bills come to the General Assembly, when they're introduced, that individual will decide the fate, not the entire fate, but it will decide what's going to happen with those bills, whether or not they even get a hearing, what committees to send it to. Lot of discretion in that role, and it's a very, I think, in a lot of ways, the most powerful position in the General Assembly, even more so than the governor. So if you think about what I've just described in terms of power, then, of course, we got to make sure that we do bring that issue, that status, that posture to fruition. And the only way to do that is to have some seats picked up. Right now, the Democrats, we sit at a disadvantage of 51-48 in terms of the number of seats out of 100, 52-48. But if we pick up some seats during this next election, as we believe that we will, numbers and studies show that things are tilting in our advantage, and we pick up those seats, then of course, then we will bring that to fruition. My good friend Don Scott is a very courageous gentleman. He's a very intelligent gentleman, and his intellect is excellent. And so with those three things together with a certain level of humility that he carries also, I think we will be in an excellent position.
Absolutely. As we all say, elections do have consequences. So we haven't started the show yet to get out the vote and so forth. But if you're listening, remember, your vote does count, especially in this last election to bring Senator Rouse on. You know, he won that one by less than 500 votes. You know, so.
Yes, sir.
But we added to the caucus with that. Listen, you've got a lot of bills up, you know, that you're looking at. You have some bills now in conference that you're assigned to. Tell us a little bit about the bills that you have and that you've championed, that they've made its way through the process and they're currently at the finish line, and let us know kind of what you're looking at, how the session will end.
Well, some good stuff going on that I personally carried, one of which was a long-time request and need in the region was to develop a regional CTE, workforce development type education process in K through 12. And so in the budget, I sponsored a measure of $20 million to help bring together several cities here in Hampton Roads to give specific training and focus to our high school students in the way of entrepreneurship, workforce development, maritime industry, information technology, cybersecurity, and the like. And it would be constructed and built in the city of Chesapeake, but the students of Portsmouth and I believe Norfolk and Suffolk could also participate in the program. And we believe that will go a long ways in trying to prepare our students for the future. Another matter happens to be for our seniors. You know, we can't forget our seniors. And so I put in for a budget amendment to assist senior services of Southeast Virginia to ensure that they continue to be in a posture to help our most wise members of our community. And so here in the region, they should receive $300,000, I think it is, and then $700,000 is the overall budget amendment that has sufficed so far. And so we'll continue on with many other things. I know there's discussions on the table about providing funding to assist with a regional effort between EVMS, Eastern Virginia Medical School, and Norfolk State, Centera, and Old Dominion. And that money's there, and folks are supporting that. So we'll see if that can continue to survive the process as well. In the way of health care, this whole matter of mental health access is something that we know is extremely important and ought to be a priority, but even more so with our children and in our school systems, K through 12 and beyond, even at the university level. And so we have $7.9 million included in the Senate budget that's going to expand the program to early childhood and parental providers. So hopefully much can come out of that. In the way of our higher education mental health support, right. A few years ago, I put money in the budget to hire counselors there at Norfolk State University, and we were happy to do that. So hopefully the university is in a good posture to provide much needed services for our students. For the witness protection program, many people will make an assumption about the witness protection program and probably didn't know that there is no funding available for that program.
Wow.
And so this year, because of the push, you want to mention leader Don Scott, for many years he led the effort to get that funded. And, of course, this year in the House budget, I think it's $7.5 million to provide support for the program. And the governor's budget is $2.5 million, and the Senate budget has $3 million in it. So to have that funding in all three of them is encouraging because at least we're going to have some resources flowing to that program is what it looks like. So that list, of course, is much, much longer. Prescription drugs, of course, trying to do what we can to try to lower the cost of prescription drugs. And then finally, one last item for me. In every session, I push hard for environmental protections. And so I have a budget amendment to make sure that we're able to restore brownfields or contaminated properties. We're going to provide additional funding for that, over an additional $2 million in that space to help clean up former contaminated properties and make them viable again. Because not all localities have virgin land that they can go to for expansion or opportunities. And so we have to take sometimes the properties that we have and figure out ways to make them viable properties again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's always a pleasure talking with you and having you on the show. I mean, you're you're full of knowledge, just a wealth of resource. And again, I'd like to just make sure I remind our listeners that you're one of the greatest supporters of your alma mater, Norfolk State University, in the legislature, ensuring that we get all that we need and then some. So, so we appreciate all that you do. And I'll let you
Absolutely.
I'll let you have the last 30 seconds as we close out.
Well, just being the Spartan that I am, I just want to let folks know that all across this land, we are so proud of our university under the direction and leadership of Dr. J, as we affectionately know her, Javon Adams Gaston by her formal name. Great leadership there, great work being done by our Board of Visitors. And we're just trying to stay the course to continue to keep Norfolk State on a path of being one of the premier universities in this country.
Absolutely.
And certainly on paper, we've shown in many categories #1 in the land.
Absolutely. And we'll see you on next week. That's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. Thank you for joining us.